Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight on Utah's 2021 police reform bills. After a summer of civil unrest that peaked after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, our state saw a flurry of police reform bills that were introduced during this legislative session. Earlier today, we caught up with Molly Davis, policy analyst with Lobbyists Institute, to recap some of these bills and talk about how they're doing on Utah's Capitol Hill.
Molly, thank you so much for making time to join us tonight. Let's start out our conversation by talking about the amount of bills in regards to police reform that we're seeing this session. There is a significantly higher amount. Do we know approximately how many there are? What's the estimate?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's been about 60 bills we've been hearing filed this year that have to do with police reform. Obviously, not all of those bills are moving forward, but that's still far higher than previous sessions.
Let's talk about how the subject of police reform came to the forefront over the past year, especially during the peak of summer after the murder of George Floyd. How did that play in the role in the higher number of police reform bills that we're seeing this session?
Well, it impacted the public's perception. They want the legislature to take action. You know, we saw protests, we saw some riots. There was upset nationwide over the police response to the George Floyd case and the Breonna Taylor case and other cases that are like that. And unfortunately, we've seen destruction, and we need something to be done from the legislative angle to really take these issues and make real change in our statute. And so that's something that has obviously sparked the high number of police reform bills this year. And I think the legislature wants to take action. They want to create change, but it's all about doing it in a meaningful way with the right stakeholders involved. You know, we need the voices of law enforcement, of the activists. We need everyone to come together and really push for meaningful change. And that's what the legislature is trying to accomplish this session.
What are some police reform bills that have done pretty well in the legislative session so far with maybe little opposition or little hurdles?
Well, one that's really close to home is one that Representative Stoddard is running, and it's a bill to add accountability for law enforcement who share intimate images of a victim in an inappropriate manner. And so this has to do with the Lauren McCluskey case that we saw in University of Utah. So that bill, for obvious reasons, has kind of sailed through the legislature so far. We've also seen Senate Bill 13 by Senator Iwamoto. That's a bill that has moved forward with relatively little opposition, and it would require the peace officer standards and training to complete investigations into law enforcement if the officer quits during the investigation. So it's making sure those are completed. We're holding officers accountable. There's also some bills that deal with additional hours of de-escalation training on the docket that have been moving forward with little to no opposition as well.
Now let's go to the other end. What bills are facing more difficulties in gaining support from the legislature?
Well, unfortunately, a bill that Lobbyists Institute really supports, Representative Hall's House Bill 245, just died in committee yesterday. It would have added restrictions to the use of no-knock warrants. So this really pertains to, the Breonna Taylor case, and more close to home, the Matthew David Stewart case here in Utah. And so this would have ensured more requirements before law enforcement can use these types of dangerous entry into individuals' homes to conduct searches. But it's a really controversial and sensitive topic. So it got voted down in committee yesterday. There's a lot of bills dealing with how officers can use force and when it's appropriate and what type of force is appropriate. And those bills are also having a difficult time moving forward as well. And the legislature wants to make sure, and we agree, that law enforcement is able to conduct their jobs without having to think, really strategically about what the law is. And we don't want to handcuff them in doing their job and keeping the public safe. But there's a fine line, of protecting individuals' civil liberties and their safety from bad actors within law enforcement. And so we're really trying to figure out what that balance is. But unfortunately, that means that some of these bills are going to go down in the process.
Now, we are more than halfway through the 2021 legislative session. What are your predictions on what we will see happen with Utah's police reform bills this session? Could we see sweeping changes across the board?
I personally think that the reforms this year, there will be some significantly modest proposals, if you will. They are significant in that they're important. The de-escalation discussion, the transparency, accountability, that's important. But the legislature does not pass knee-jerk reactionary bills. We've seen some city councils and some state legislatures pass bills right after, the protests and the riots over police reform last summer. Utah legislature, that's not their style. They like to take time to study the issue, make more informed decisions. So I would say that the police reform is coming to Utah, but it's going to take a little bit longer here. It's not going to pass right through with sweeping changes this year, but it is coming in future years.
Molly, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about Utah's police reform bills. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on Utah's 2021 police reform bills. We turn now to two local organizations watching this session's bills very closely. Joining us now live in studio is Lex Scott, organizer of Black Lives Matter Utah, and Ian Adams, executive director for the Utah Fraternal Order of Police. Lex and Ian, thank you both for taking time to be part of our panel discussion tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Lex, we'll start with you. There were several police reform bills that Black Lives Matter Utah supported that you said are already dead this session. Could you tell us about some of those bills that didn't make it through the session?
I will. So Wheatley had a bill that would regulate independent oversight of police. I wouldn't say it's dead, it's been tabled. That was very upsetting. And then we also had the body cam bill. We want all body cam footage released within 10 days of every critical incident. We were even willing to budge on that and go up to 60 days. However, they have tabled that bill as well.
Yeah, your guys' efforts, so you guys are persistent though, and we always have next session. Now, Ian, let's turn to HB 264. It's sponsored by Representative Angela Romero. It would require law enforcement officers to file a report every time they point a gun or taser at someone. You had a role in getting this bill on the Hill. Tell us about this.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. It's a great bill and one of the good examples of how the Utah FOP operates legislatively. We believe in basing policy on evidence and avoiding zero-sum games. In other words, we don't support policies that are bad for cops but good for the community, or vice versa. I just don't buy into that trade-off. And so this is a bill that's based on really good scientific evidence, over 16 years of data coming out of Dallas, as well as experimental data out of Colorado, that documenting when an officer points a weapon at someone has really good outcomes for both police and the community. And this is already being done at most Utah agencies, but the bill is an effort to make sure that that's consistent across the state.
Now, Ian, let's talk about HB 367. That one is sponsored by Representative Brian King and is also known as the Qualified Immunity Amendments Bill. It would require a certified peace officer to obtain a bond or insurance and create a cause of action that can be brought against the peace officer and their employer. Can you tell us why Utah FOP opposes this bill?
Sure, and it links back to what I was just talking about. This is a bill that was launched in the middle of a night, quietly on a federal holiday when no one was paying attention, and with zero input from stakeholders. As your previous analyst, Molly Davis, who I work closely with on a lot of these bills, pointed out, these bills do require a lot of input from stakeholders who are impacted by it. Unfortunately, Representative King, despite launching a bill so secretly that it could bankrupt Utah law enforcement families who don't even make the amount of money he's talking about, he had zero input from line officers and their families who would be devastated by this bill. And so thankfully, the Utah legislature likes to move carefully based on evidence. and not hurt people just for the sake of message bill. So I don't think this bill will be successful in this session. I look forward to working with Representative King or any other stakeholders who want to take on this very difficult topic.
Lex, let's hear from you. What do you think about HB 367?
Well, I believe that officers who use excessive force should be held accountable for that. And at this point in the state of Utah, you cannot file a lawsuit against an officer unless you pay for their legal fees. So if you are the victim of police brutality and you would like to launch a lawsuit, you have to pay the legal fees for the officer before you can do that. That's not right. Officers should be held to the same level as the public.
Lex, let's move to HB 62. It's sponsored by Representative Andrew Stoddard and is also known as the Post-Certification Amendments Bill. It would add, quote, conduct involving dishonesty or deception or violation of employers' use of force policy as additional grounds for suspension or revocation of police officer certification. What is your take on this bill?
I think it's a fluff bill. I feel like it really doesn't have any merit because we have to first rewrite what the use of force policies are. Every police agency in the state has a different use of force policy and excessive force policy. And then when you give those to post and say, hey, they violated the use of force policy, you have officers investigating other officers, which is a conflict of interest. So I think it's fun to put out fluff bills, but I would like real bills.
Ian, we have about 30 seconds left before we have to go to break. Can I get you to chime in on HB 62?
Yeah, I think that's a little unfair. Representative Stoddard is listening to the stakeholders involved and has come to a really good bill that will put into statute how to deal with officers who have been shown to be dishonest or deceptive in their investigations. So I think that that's a positive step forward for the state.
Lex and Ian, hold that thought. We do have to take a quick commercial break, but when we return, we'll resume our discussion on Utah's 2021 police reform bills. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on Utah's 2021 police reform bills. After a summer of civil unrest, Utah saw dozens of police reform bills introduced this session. Before the break, Lex Scott, organizer of Black Lives Matter Utah, and Ian Adams, executive director for the Utah Fraternal Order of Police, joined us to discuss some of these bills. We pick up right where we left off. Ian, I'll start with you. HB 245, sponsored by Representative Craig Hall, would add restrictions to no-knock warrants. This bill was held yesterday in committee. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, we worked closely with Libertas, including your previous analyst, Molly Davis, on this bill. The initial iteration of this bill was quite problematic, had a lot of stuff that was threatening officer safety. But to their credit, they worked closely with us and removed those sections. Our organization, the Utah Fop, did not oppose this bill. So we are looking forward to it in some future iteration. I think that there's an appetite to continue working there.
Lex, let's hear from you. What do you think about this bill, about no-knock warrants?
I think it's important to have regulations on no-knock warrants, but I believe that the majority of officer-involved shootings don't occur with no-knock warrants. So I would like bills that affect the majority of officer-involved shootings.
Now, Lex, HB 74, sponsored by Representative Mark Wheatley, would change state code to allow cities to create police oversight boards with independent authority over the chief of police under certain conditions. What do you think about this bill?
I love this more than life. Police officers should not be allowed to investigate their own crimes and to find themselves innocent. It is a conflict of interest. We cannot hold them to the honor code and hope that they will investigate their fellow officers and that they went to the academy with and hold them to the same standard. It is so important to have independent oversight of police. This, to me, is the most important thing that we need in police reform right now.
Ian, let's hear from you. What do you think about HB 74?
Well, unfortunately, HB 74 wrote in some very poisonous language that for some reason would bar the, say, daughter of an officer who was killed in the line of duty from holding a political office. But if somebody had killed that police officer, they were perfectly defined to serve in that same office. So I don't think debate ever reached the merits of this bill because of the poisonous, unconstitutional language that was written into the bottom of it.
Lex, did you want to respond to that?
I do. I don't think it's poisonous language. Basically, we are creating a board that would investigate police misconduct. And these people are essentially jurors. There is no jury in the United States that would allow a family member or a friend to sit on the jury. So we're trying to eliminate conflict of interest, and we're trying to create independent oversight. And the police and the FOP are deathly afraid of independent oversight of policing.
Ian, I'll give you a chance to respond before we have to move on to the next question. Anything you want to say?
Yeah, the state sets up independent oversight already through city councils and mayors. It just isn't appropriate to set up this type of commission where stakeholders don't get to have a voice. Our organization and others stand for more stakeholder voices, not less.
All right, Lex, we have to move on to the next question. Something your organization has continuously pushed for is more training on de-escalation. HB 162, sponsored by Representative Romero, would require 16 of the 40 hours of annual police training to be focused on de-escalation tactics and working with individuals experiencing a mental health crisis. What kind of impact do you think this bill will have, and is this a step in the right direction?
It is absolutely a step in the right direction. We would like every police agency in the state to have more de-escalation training. And we know that the majority of officer-involved shootings are a result of a mental health crisis, like in the Bobby Duckworth case. So we would like them to have more mental health training. And sometimes there's a city in the United States that actually created an agency to respond to those mental health calls. I think that would be something that advantageous that we could do in Utah as well.
Ian, let's hear from you. What do you think about HB 162?
Well, I agree with Lex. We should have those types of organizations that can help officers respond. And in fact, in Salt Lake County, we've had a long-lasting program called MCOT that does just that. And I understand there's efforts to expand that to other counties. We support more training. And in fact, the downside to this bill is just that it replaces 16 hours of training with quote unquote de-escalation training without ever really defining what that is. So I would like to see additional resources from the state to ensure that the officers are trained at the highest level possible.
Lex and Ian, we have enough time for some final words. Ian, I'll start with you. Anything else that you'd like to mention that we haven't talked about?
Well, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank those representatives and stakeholders who are working really hard. Utah's part-time legislature doesn't give us a lot of time, and there's a ton of important, salient public issues to deal with. We'll still be here to continue to represent the voice of officers and vindicate their activities and their honor that occur every single day in this state, every single city. And my heart reaches out to all the families that continue to bear the sacrifice of their service.
Lex, let's hear from you. Final words.
We, Black Lives Matter, would like independent civilian review boards that have power. There are no civilian review boards that have subpoena power, the power to fire an officer or to bring charges against an officer. I do want to thank every legislator that put a bill on the Hill. When you look at all the police reform bills on the Hill in Utah right now, there are Republican bills, there are Democratic bills, and people are reaching across the aisle. I do want to say that we need Utah to take this seriously. If they think the unrest has stopped, it hasn't. Every time we see a critical incident, we see the crowds come out again. And we would like peace across the nation. And the only way that we achieve that truly is by creating real police reforms. So I hope everyone takes this seriously, and I hope that we actually get some real reforms this legislative session.
All right, you've been hearing from Lex Scott, organizer of Black Lives Matter Utah, and Ian Adams, executive director for the Utah Fraternal Order of Police. Thank you both for being a part of our panel discussion tonight. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Rosie. Appreciate it.